Okay, so in this example, I'm going to show you how you can read text from a text file. Let me explain what I've got so far. So I've got this phrase, once upon a time I was writing some things. I'm taking that phrase and I'm replacing all the spaces in it with new line characters. So it will still have the same words, but each word will be on its own line. And then I'm using this method that I wrote in the other video to write that string to a file called example.txt. So let's run it. And you'll see here that I've got all the words each on its own line in example.txt. I'm going to show you how you can open this file and then read each line one at a time and do something with the strings that you read in as input. So before, we needed something called a print writer in order to output to the file. We're going to use something called a BufferedReader to read from the file, and I'm going to call my object in, and I'm going to create a new BufferedReader from a new input stream, and the input stream, excuse me, no, let's use a file reader, and then we'll give it the name of the file that we want to read, example.txt. And now let's import all the various things. So I'll import file reader from java.io, same thing with BufferedReader. And then just like last time, we'll have these unhandled exceptions, so I'll surround them with a try-catch block. And all of the code involving the reading will be here inside the try portion of the try-catch block. Okay, let's write something that's slightly broken first, and then we'll fix it. So I'm going to have a while loop, and I'm going to use... Actually, I take it back. Let's use a do while loop. So I'm going to create a string called line, and then here I'm going to say line equals in.readLine. So remember, in is the BufferedReader object, and I've created it so that it's reading from the file I want to be reading from. And the readLine method just reads in the next line in the file. So the BufferedReader object is keeping track of where it is inside the text file. So it starts at the top, and if I run this method once, it will return the first line in the text file, and I'm saving it into this line variable. But now the BufferedReader object has moved down a line in the file, so I can't read that same line in again. The next time I run readLine, it's going to give me the next line in the file. So it's really important that whatever you want to do with the file, with the lines that you read in, you don't accidentally just overwrite this variable, because you can only read them in once from start to finish. So I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to save all the lines into an array list of strings. So let's make that up here. I'm going to make an array list of string objects called lines. And so now that I've read in a line, I can say lines.addLine. Where, remember, lines is my list, and I'm telling the list that I want to add line, which comes from here, which is the string that I read from the file. So I'm in this loop, and I'm reading one line at a time from the file, and I'm adding each one at a time to this list. Okay, well, how do we know when to stop? So when in reaches the bottom of the file, and you try and say readLine, it's going to return null. So I want to keep doing this while line doesn't equal null. Here it says, what does it say? Okay, so it's complaining that we're not handling a certain type of exception. So here in the catch block, I'm going to replace this just with the word exception, which is like a generic data type that holds all possible kinds of errors. So whatever type of error might happen, we're catching them all here. And then what do I want to do? At the very end, I want to say in.close, because the file is open, and so I want to close the file once I'm done reading from it. All right, let's at the end here, after the try-catch block, I'm going to just print out lines, which is my array list, so that we can kind of see in the console what was it that we read from the file. So let's run the program, and you see, so it looks like it sort of worked. I've got each line of the file being saved as its own element of the array list, except at the end here it's saving null, because I'm in this do while loop. So the last time it goes through, line will be null, and then I add line, and then I check to see if it's null, and then it exits, which is probably not what I want. So one way you can fix this problem is right after you read in, you could have an if statement where you say if line equals null, then break. Break is a statement that will exit whatever loop you're most immediately in. A more common pattern is, instead of using a do while loop, to just have a while loop here, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And so we actually do the read statement right here in the while loop, like this. But I have parentheses here, and I'll say while this doesn't equal null. And this is sort of a pattern from C programming. The idea is if this reads in a null and it assigns null here, this entire expression here will evaluate to be null. So I'm saying let's try and read in the line, but in the event that the line is null, this entire comparison that's comparing the result of this to null will tell me that it is not true, that it's not equal to null, and so I'll exit. So in other words, it does the same thing, only it does it all kind of wrapped up in one line of code, which is kind of nice. So let's run it again, and now you see that I've got the same thing here. And if I wanted to, I could do something like this. I could add, let's add a num that starts at 1, and then here I'll say num plus line, and then num plus plus. And so that's going to add line numbers in there. So I've got, well, here, let's add a space in there. So it'll be like a number followed by a space followed by the line that I read in from the file, like that. Maybe a dot. Ah, very nice. Before I leave, let's do the same thing we did in the last video, which is show how you can kind of wrap this all up as a single nice method. So I'm going to delete this array list. Well, here, let's wrap stuff into a method first, and then we'll delete what we're going to delete. So I'm going to cut all that, and I'm going to do this. String from file equals read string from file, and I'm going to give it the file name I want to read from. Okay, so this is a method we're going to create right now. And the way this method is going to work is it's going to open this file for reading, and it's going to read in all the lines, but it's going to return the entire contents of the file as a single giant string. And then once I've got the string, I can do whatever I want with it. So I'm going to paste my code back in here. I don't want an array list anymore because I'm not keeping track of the lines separately. Here, instead of saying example.text, I want to use the input to my method, which I will call file name. All right, so now I'm reading this for reading. I'm opening that for reading. Let's delete some of this other stuff that I don't need. I'm reading in the lines. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a string called output. I'm just going to call it output, and it's going to start out being empty like this. And then after I've read in a line, I'm going to say output equals output plus line. And what that does is it's taking the string and it's adding onto the end of the string whatever line we've most recently read. Okay, this is also, I think, going to be slightly broken, and we'll fix it in a second. But let's kind of see what it looks like. Okay, so then at the end here, oh, sorry, let's create output outside the try-catch block like this. So that way if there's an error, here at the end we'll return output. And in case there's an error, we'll go to the catch portion and we'll return output, which is just empty string. So it's sort of like we're creating an empty one. Here's where we loop over the file and add the file lines onto the end of it, and then we return it at the end here. So back up here, now let's print it out and see what it looks like. Oops. So we're reading the file, saving it as a string, and then printing it out. And here's what it looks like. Cool. So something I'm noticing is in the original file, each word was on its own line. And then when I read it in, all of those line breaks disappeared and everything's all kind of strung together. That's probably less good. What's happening here is when we say readLine, the string that gets read doesn't include the line break at the end of the line. So an easy thing to do is let's just add it back in. After we add the line that we read to the output, let's add back in the line break that represents going to the next line that actually exists in the file but wasn't being returned when we read in the line from the file. Cool. So now when we run it, it's sort of back the way that we want it to be. All right, cool. Come back in a different video and I'll sort of show you how to apply these basic ideas to sort of save the state of a game. So you've got a bunch of objects and you want to save their information to a file, and then you can like load that same information.